I was actually in Houston on a business trip in August of 2016 and had a pulmonary embolism, passed out, fell face first into a wall, and woke up completely crippled. And so I've told that story a couple of times. You can go back to some of the recordings if you want to hear that. But I was rescued from that situation. And over the last little over 5 years, I've been having to rebuild. And I've enjoyed, I've appreciated folks like David and Jill that have continued to use me and utilize what I do. And I hope that this morning will be helpful to you as well. So that's my 3-minute version. There is a 45-minute version that I'm glad to tell you, but that's not for today. But that lets you know what you're dealing with. So I hope this box doesn't bother you. Fortunately, you're going to be looking at a PowerPoint for the majority of this, and I hope it's helpful to you. Now, last time, if you were here in January, and I won't ask you to raise your hands, but if any of you that were with us in January, I told lots of stories and used lots of slides and did much more motivational. Today, it's going to be much more informational. And so if you're a note taker, you're going to want to take notes and you're going to kind of keep up. And I'm going to be doing the best I can to pick up and put down stuff that I think would be helpful to you. So occasionally you'll see me playing with the stick here, and that's just because I'm having to move around and get things up and going. So let me get the slide up, and we'll get started. So I want to talk to you about principles of lasting success. Now, any of you, there are two challenges that we have: getting something going and keeping it going. And there are some principles that apply in both. There are some things when you're getting a business started, you need a set of skills. To keep it going, you need a set of skills. But then there's some things that you need in both seasons. And I want to talk to you about that today. I ran across a story the other day of a guy who was reading about a plane crash, or an Air Force pilot had tried to land a plane and had some difficulties. And so he had written up a report. And when I read this report, I thought, man, I want this guy to be my pilot, because there's nothing like confidence when you're in a leadership role. And this is what the report said. It said after catastrophic engine failure, I landed as I had no power. The landing gear failed to deploy and no braking was available. Hang on, guys. Okay. I bounced over the stone wall at the end of the runway, struck the trailer of a truck while crossing the perimeter road, crashed through the guardrail, grazed a large pine tree, ran over a tractor parked in the adjacent field, hit another tree. Then I lost control. That's the guy I want. He still thought he was in control up until he hit the other tree. Folks, if you're going to be successful in what you're doing, you kind of have to think that way. You kind of have to think, you know what, I've got to make this thing happen. I've got to keep this thing going. And no matter what happens, I've got to keep flying the airplane. There's 3 things I want to talk to you about today when we talk about lasting success. Number 1, I want you to think like an entrepreneur. You've got to think like an entrepreneur. There are 3 aspects to thinking like an entrepreneur that are going to be helpful to you. Number 1, an entrepreneur sees opportunities and manages obstacles. An entrepreneur sees opportunities and manages obstacles. Non-entrepreneurs see obstacles and then try to manage opportunities. They see a problem, and then all they can focus on is the problem. All they can think about is why this won't work. And then any opportunity that comes along, they're kind of managing that opportunity. They're not really grabbing hold of that opportunity. When I get around a true entrepreneur, I'm a partial entrepreneur. I'm probably like most of you. I want to own my own business, but I really don't mind a little security. Anybody else like that? Like I want to believe that I'm like the David Landrums of the world that kind of throw caution to the wind. And I just kind of wonder if he walks around with blinders on all the time, because there's just never an opportunity he sees he doesn't get excited about. I'm kind of half that way. And so one of the things I have to constantly deal with in my own life is I have to make sure that I'm seeing opportunities and that I'm managing the obstacles. If you're going to build what you're trying to build with Primerica, you've got to keep the opportunities in front of you. Now, an entrepreneur doesn't deny that there's a problem. That's not the point. They just maintain their focus on what they're trying to accomplish. The second thing, if you're going to think like an entrepreneur, is that an entrepreneur accepts success presupposes failures. Now, this is going to be a little counterintuitive. Many entrepreneurs, when you talk to them, they almost don't talk about failure, because in their mind, everything is a success. Non-entrepreneurs see failures as preventing success. Whenever they fail, they think that's what's keeping them from being successful. But an entrepreneur goes, you know what? I'm going to fail sometimes. Things aren't going to go right. Sometimes things just aren't going to happen the way I want to. Let me tell you something. When you get into Primerica, if you hadn't been doing it very long, or if you've been doing it 10 years, you already know that you're going to be told no. You're going to be told you're crazy. You're going to be told that you've gotten in on some cultic multi-level marketing thing. You're going to be told you've already had to fight those battles. You've already had to face that. It doesn't matter if you've been in a week or if you've been in it 10 years. You're going to have to accept that things don't always go right. And what are you going to do about it? An entrepreneur goes, hey, that's just a part of it. You'll hear them say all kinds of things. An entrepreneur will say, a no is always just a maybe. A no is a yes waiting to happen. And you say, well, that's just a bunch of crazy talk. Well, there is a part of an entrepreneur that's exactly how they see it. It's not a game. It's not something it's not something that they fake. They have cultivated themselves. Now, because David and I have known each other so long, I remember in his early years, and I was there when he was just getting building. Some of you will probably remember that. David, I don't remember where you were in '86 when we met, but you were still in that ramp up stage. And I can remember David just consistently just overcoming stuff. And I can remember you telling me about standing in the mirror and just looking at yourself and going, basically coaching yourself up and just saying, you know what, I have to overcome any of my negative thinking. An entrepreneur says, look, failure is going to happen, but that's not what I'm focused on. There are going to be times that it's not going to work well. There's going to be times that the main office is going to mess up. There's going to be times that you fill out the wrong boxes. And an entrepreneur goes, well, I guess that's just a part of the journey, which leads us to number 3. An entrepreneur believes that resistance strengthens resolve. They believe that resistance strengthens resolve. When people push against me, that doesn't discourage me. It strengthens me. If you're an athlete, you know that the only way you strengthen your muscles, the only way you strengthen your running, the only way you get there is resistance. My wife, I tried to find this cartoon. I couldn't find it. If any of you know the cartoon, Maxine, there's a great picture of her at a gym, and she's sitting on the edge of this is an older lady. She's probably an octogenarian, and she's sitting on the edge of a bench press bench, and she has a martini in her hand. And she doesn't know why she's not getting in shape. She went to the gym. Well, until you get on those weights and until they hurt and until they push you, until there's resistance, you're not going to really grow. A lot of a non-entrepreneur, an employee, somebody that wants to make it, here's what they're going to say. I just had too much resistance. I just had too much resistance. I couldn't do it. The greater the resistance, the greater the strength. Entrepreneurs think, of course, how else am I going to grow if I don't have resistance? One of my stories that I have loved to look at over the years is the Titanic. You know, one of the reasons the Titanic sank was because the water was so smooth. They were in one of the smoothest seasons. In fact, when they left, they couldn't believe the weather report. Well, Dan, why was that a problem? How did that lead to the sinking of the ship? Because one of the ways that they would identify a iceberg is that when waves would hit it, it would create a splash and a foam. And the foam in the night to the sailor, the foam was incandescent. It's like glowed in the dark. And had they been on rougher seas, they would have actually seen the waves crashing against the iceberg, and they would have seen it further out. You know, sometimes we're always praying for smoother sailing, but that smooth sailing can also prevent you from seeing what's ahead of you. So don't fear the resistance. I read a story this last year of a young man by the name of Damien Jackson. Damien Jackson plays for the Nebraska Cornhuskers. Now, I am not a Nebraska Cornhusker fan, but when I picked up this story, I almost began to become a Cornhusker. Damien Jackson was raised by a single mom. They lived on very low income. She did everything she could to help him. He became a good student, knew that he had to get out of poverty. He was going to have to work hard. And so when he got into high school, he decided he wanted to go to Nebraska for school. Well, he didn't have enough money. He tried to get a scholarship, wasn't able to get a scholarship. So he decided that he would go into the military, and he would serve in the military, get the money from that, and then be able to come back and go to school. Well, he had never picked up a gun. He didn't know anything about the military. He just went and signed up and decided that he wanted a challenge, so he wanted to become a Marine. So he went through basic training, graduated in the top of his class, and decided that he would become a SEAL. Well, he didn't know anything about that, so he went through the SEAL training, and eventually when they started with 250 in their class and ended with 30, he was one of the 30, and in the top of that, after he came out of that, he decided that he wanted to become a sharpshooter. He had never picked up a gun until he joined the military. He became one of the best sharpshooters in the SEAL team. After he left, he decided he wanted to go back to Nebraska, but having experienced kind of the adrenaline of the military, he knew he had to do something more than go to class. So he decided he wanted to play football. He had never played football in his life. And he tried to walk on. He showed up, went through the tryouts, and got cut. He was not going to take no for an answer. He wanted to play football for the University of Nebraska. So he went and camped outside the stadium until he finally caught one of the coaches and begged them for a chance to come try out. After they fussed at him for cornering him, they let him come in. He tried out for the football team again, and they put him on as a scrub. Over the last 4 years, he's become one of their starters and one of their stars. He now leads the team out. Of course, they finished their season and won't be playing, but if you'd have watched him during the year, he always led his team out carrying the American flag. I was so moved by that story because here was a guy that said, I know what I want and I've got to do what it takes. He had everything against him. Raised poor, raised in a tough environment, didn't have a lot of opportunities. And he said, I'm going to go make those opportunities. That's an entrepreneur. Number 2, you got to cultivate the Marine motto. If you and I are going to be successful in this, we have to cultivate the Marine motto. The Marines were started in 1775, and they were started to support the military, both in defensive and offensive maneuvers. But at that time, all the Marines were kind of a scrap group. So they had no equipment. They had to go get all their own equipment and improvise. And so they developed their own style of providing. And so now one of the mottos that they, of course, you know, Semper Fi, but one of the mottos that lead them is this little phrase: improvise, adapt, overcome. When you're facing things, improvise, adapt, and overcome. There's all kinds of phrases. You've heard it. Every game plan works until you hit resistance. You know, every contingency plan works until the first bullet flies. And that's true. And they've even understood that themselves. And so when you're in a challenging situation and the plan doesn't go right, if we're going to make it, you have to improvise, and then you have to adapt, and then you overcome. How do you do that? First of all, you have to identify your worthy purpose. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? Why are you in Primerica? Because at some point, the only thing that's going to get, there's going to be days and weeks that the only thing that gets you going is the fact that you have a worthy purpose. And here's how you know something is worthy. There is usually a significant loss if you don't achieve it. If you've ever heard David and Jill's story, you've heard him at some point in that story say this: I had no other options. You ever heard him say that? When I started with Primerica, nothing else was going to work. And if I didn't make this work, I was not going to be able to provide for my family. And that's a pretty worthy cause. I woke up in 2003 without employment. I woke up having been removed from a position over politics. I know I'd done nothing wrong. In fact, I had been quite successful, but I had crossed the wrong person. And suddenly I went from a guy who thought I had security to a guy who made a commitment. I never wanted to depend on someone else again to make the decision about my welfare. I never wanted to depend on anyone else because they have too much control over my life. And so I started building a business. My children were 13 to 3 years old. I had lots of mouths to feed, 6 of them. They were coming into the most expensive time in their life. I had 4 teenage girls at one time. Just think about that. Talking about resistance. I had 4 teenage girls at one time, and I'm trying to feed all of them, get them into all of their dance recitals, get them into all their volleyball, get them into all the stuff that they were trying to do. And at the same time, I'm starting a business from scratch. I'm going and I'm meeting with people and I'm trying to sell them on what I can do and how I can help them. I remember one of my best friends, I called him up and he owned his own business. And this was probably a $50 million business. And I just went and said, hey, man, here's what I'm doing. I'd really like to help you. And he told me, he said, Dan, I love you, but you don't have enough experience. I can't defend you to my board. And I remember walking out of that Chili's just devastated and thinking, man, the one guy I had on my list that I thought would hire me, you know, that uncle that you thought would put their money in your first investment, you know, that dad that you thought would put their money with you, and they said no. You remember how you felt? You remember walking out going, man, I thought he would certainly do it. What are you going to do in that moment? And in that moment, your purpose better be strong enough to drive you. Because let me tell you something. I didn't want to not feed my kids. I didn't want to not make it. And so my purpose had to be bigger than my challenge. I want to ask you something. Why are you doing this? What's your purpose? What's the compelling purpose that gets you up in the morning? Because if you can't identify that, you're not going to have the longevity and the motivation that you need. Which brings me to number 3. Always keep your purpose in front of you. Always keep your purpose in front of you. Regardless of what's going on around you, find your motivation in your purpose. I still have seasons because I'm having to rebuild. I still have seasons that I'm having to remind myself, this is why I do what I do. You may be old fashioned like me. I'm old. I'm 58 years old. I remember when I was in my 20s and some of my leaders, my dad was in his late 50s, and I thought he had one foot in the grave. And here I am, 58, thinking he's 91 now. So I'm pretty excited that I still got a good 33 years left that I know of. He's still going strong. And so here I am, but let me tell you, I still think in terms of 3x5 cards. Anyone else still think in terms of 3x5 cards? I used to carry those around. I'd have them in my pocket. I would put them on my dashboard of my car. That's back when you could do stuff in your car and didn't feel like you were making it ugly. I had them on my mirror at home. I had 3x5 cards on my desk. If I had a quote that I wanted to memorize or a scripture that I wanted to memorize, I would put it on a 3x5 card and keep it in front of me. But what are you doing to keep it in front of you? Maybe it's a picture on the refrigerator. Get a tattoo on your arm if you have to, but do something to keep your purpose in front of you, because if it's compelling enough, it will give you the energy that you need. I was meeting with a young lady the other day who owns her own business, and she had asked me to coach her. And so she had hired me to help her. And so we were talking, and she sent me a text the other day, and I had kind of had this similar conversation with her. And she had written out her purpose and made it her screensaver and made it the screensaver for her phone, so that every time she opened her phone, her purpose was right there in front of her, reminding her why she was fighting for her business. What are you doing to keep your purpose in front of you? And number 4 under this second point, improvise in the moment. Look, things are going to happen. David does great training on this. There are other people in Primerica that do great training. There is always something you can be doing. When you're facing those challenges, we're going to talk a little bit more about this in a minute. When you're facing those challenges, you have to improvise in the moment. When you wake up in the morning with 6 appointments planned and 3 of them get canceled, improvise. You don't have open time to go get more coffee. You've got open time to get back in front of the phone and make some more phone calls. You've still got some time to start making another list. Those become open opportunities to improvise. Remember, we have to improvise, adapt, and overcome. When you're in that situation where you've just spent 3 hours with a client and they told you no, they didn't want to invest, in that moment, you have to improvise. How are you going to deal with this? If you're too discouraged, you're not going to have the courage to look and say, you know what, this is a lot of money. It's your money, and I understand you may need some time. So I want you to take that time, but I'd really like you to stay open, because I really believe I can help you. I really believe I can serve you. In that moment, you have to improvise, adjust your strategy and tactics, but whatever you do, keep moving. Number 3, third big principle, you have to tame the amygdala. That's where I get the title, where I talk about, if you saw my title, the Primerica amygdala. David, tell us what the Primerica amygdala is. I'm sorry, you don't have a clue. I just wanted to put you on the spot.
No, actually, I do not have a clue, Dan.
So let me give you a little education on the amygdala. Some of you are going to know exactly what I'm talking about.
I know it's part of the brain.
It is a part of the brain. That's exactly right. Okay. Look at you, David. You're showing me up already.
Hey, I'm brilliant.
Yeah. No, we're not going that far. But yes, that's good. I'm glad you're still watching the Discovery Channel. And so the brain, if you think about the brain, it's got several parts. And the 2 primary parts that we talk about, there's several significant parts, But if you look at the front of the brain, that's called the frontal lobe. And the frontal lobe is where we deal with all of our rational thinking and problem solving. It's what they call your executive functions. It is the most underdeveloped part of a teenager. It's one of the last things developed. In fact, the frontal cortex does not finish developing until you're about 25 years old. But here's the challenge. You see that little bitty pink thing in there? That's the amygdala. Here's what's fascinating. That's where your emotions are. That's where you react to what's happening in front of you. That's the fight or flight part of your brain. It is one of the smallest parts of the brain, and yet it is one of the things that rules everyone way too much. Let me tell you something. I've made a good living as an executive coach because people have allowed their amygdala to be a lot bigger than it should be. They've given it way too much authority. This very little thing in your brain is controlling everything else. And a part of maturity, a part of the maturity, even in business, is learning to overcome the power of the amygdala, making sure you tame it so that your frontal lobe, your executive decision, your ability to make a rational, focused decision without all this fight or flight, without this fear, without this emotional hysteria, you have to learn to manage that. I don't want to go into a big study here, but a lot of our problems today is that we're training people that they should develop their emotions better rather than teaching them that emotions are really, really good. They're important, but they need to be in balance and in many cases subject to truth. So let me give you a definition. So in psychology, they call this the amygdala hijack. The amygdala hijack. And that's when your amygdala hijacks the rest of your brain. And it's actually a psychological term. The amygdala highlight occurs when your amygdala responds to stress and disables your frontal lobes. That activates the fight or flight response and disables rational reason responses. In other words, the amygdala hijacks control of your brain and your responses. All right. So how do we overcome that? How do we tame the amygdala? Number one, I want you to hear me on this. Recognize that all dangers in Primerica are emotional. All dangers in Primerica are emotional. You have no real, true danger in Primerica. Your kids aren't going to die. Your spouse isn't going to be kidnapped. You're not going to be subject to a terrorist attack working for Primerica. Primerica's all of the fear, all of the danger in Primerica is emotional. Rejection, laziness, fear of being tired, not wanting to be a failure, not understanding why you have to make 20 phone calls to get 4 appointments. All of that is emotional. And so one way you tame the amygdala and overcome the Primerica amygdala is recognize that every danger in Primerica is emotional. It's not actual. And you need to be able to reason yourself into understanding, I don't need to let this thing be bigger than what it should be. Number two, identify your amygdala hijack. What do I mean by that? Something is causing you to give in to that emotion. What is it? I don't want to get into any therapy. So let me just put the principle out here for you. And then if you need to talk more, you can reach out to me privately. When you and I are trying to do something significant, some of the issues that are affecting the rest of our life begin to come to the forefront. This is when maybe you're having to overcome the fact that you felt like you always disappointed your father. This may be the time that you come to face the fact that you experienced abuse at one point in your life. This may be the time where you realize that maybe all that partying you did in high school didn't allow you to develop your frontal lobe as much, and you need to discipline yourself to overcome it. There is something, if there's always something that's throwing you off, if there's something that's always causing you to throw in the towel and go home and quit and need to get to another Primerica meeting to be pumped up without any evidence that you're getting the job done, then overcome, tame that amygdala by identifying what is it that sets you off. Let people reflect back to you their observations. Let them say to you, look, you need to be careful. I've had people throughout the years say, Dan, you're just overreacting. Dan, you're too much in your head on that. You're creating scenarios in your head that just aren't there. Maybe you can learn to journal and self-diagnose. If you need counseling, go get it. But doing a job like this will actually help you become a healthier person, because you'll begin to identify this amygdala hijack that happens in your life. So don't be afraid to face that. Don't be afraid to look at that and to overcome it. Train your mind to stop reacting. Number 3. It's hard because I keep wanting to ask if there's any questions, and we just can't do it here. Number 3, develop countermeasures to the hijack. Develop countermeasures to the hijack. You have internal responses to your hijack. Maybe you get anxious. Maybe you get fearful. Maybe you go into this, nobody likes me. Everybody hates me. I'm going to eat some worms. Anybody remember that song?
Hey, Dan. Hey,
yes,
Dan.
sir.
No, people can, if they have a question, they can put on chat and we can, and you could answer.
If that happens, David, get my attention because I can't see the chat.
No, but I can. So
yeah, that's what I'm saying. Please do just that right there. Interrupt me. All right.
No, anybody has any questions for Dan, just put them on chat. And
yeah, I'm flying through this because I'm trying to get stuff in front of you that then you can go think about and process. All right. So first of all, if you're going to develop your countermeasure, you have to know what your internal responses are. How many of you know, if you're honest with yourself, you have that internal thing toward your spouse or the person you're seeing or your children or to that neighbor or to your parents, and you kind of have this internal thing that happens where you're in turmoil inside. I had to be honest, especially in my early years, that I had to identify internally how I would get wrapped around the axle. And I had to recognize that. And it was affecting my marriage. It was affecting my relationship to my kids. And it was certainly affecting my businesses and the work that I was doing, even at that time as a pastor. And so I had to recognize that I was insecure. I felt threatened. I didn't feel important. I didn't feel valuable. And all of that came out in my conversations. Secondly, I had to know what my external responses are. All right. So because one of my internal was that I didn't feel like I was respected. I was the youngest in 4 children, and I could tell you my whole story. It's not, it was bigger in my head than it was in real life. It was real. But I was that kid that no matter what I said, I felt like everyone else's idea was better. So by the time I grew up, I had developed this thing that nobody really believed or no one valued what I had to say. And that made me very controlling and very unteachable. When people would try to correct me, I didn't have the ability to respond, so I would shut them down. I would get quiet. I would pout. I would get quiet. I would boycott them. That was my external response to the internal hijack. And I had to identify those and develop countermeasures. So, for instance, I had to learn that when someone disagreed with me, I learned to count to 10 inside my head before I said anything, which gave me time to process what if they're right. All right. So when you're out selling and you've made an appointment, you sit down with somebody and they go, I just don't know. I just don't trust this. I think I want to go to a financial advisor and I don't want to, and they give you all the reasons. And internally, you go, oh man, I'm just no good at this. I'm just not going to ever do this. I'm never going to be successful. And your amygdala hijack kicks in because of fear of failure, fear of rejection. You have to get alone in yourself and go, wait a minute. That was one person who told me no. Yeah, I've had several tell me no this week. But here's going to be my response. There are 7 billion people on the face of the earth. I've got a larger pool to swim in. I've got a larger pond to fish in than the 7 people in my immediate family. You don't need 80% of your people that you go to say yes. You need to make sure you're going to enough people that get you the sales you need. And so you have to create, instead of throwing in the towel, train yourself to make a list of more names. Train yourself to go back to the office before you go home and set up next day's agenda. Do something to create countermeasures. Number 4, get around successful people. It is so easy. I want to be real careful here. I'm out of time, so let me see if I can. So I've got one quick last point, but I want to say this very importantly. Folks, I'm not saying that you should avoid negative people, because that's almost contrary to what we said earlier. Resistance is a reality. We have to learn to deal with that. We have to learn to face that. What I am saying is this: be intentional to be around successful people. Be intentional to find people that are doing it right and listen to them. Being on here this morning is a huge investment in yourself. It's your willingness to say, I'm going to give up an hour. That's a pretty important hour. If you're anything like me, Saturday mornings are valuable. And so you're already making an investment in your success. And I'm very proud of you for that. But a part of it is also, I want to be on the call with David Landrum. I want to be on the call with several of these people that are doing well. I want to be on the call with people that are doing it right. And instead of explaining why I can't be like them, I'm going to try to draw from them those things that'll help me grow and help me mature and become better at what I do. Seek them out. I say it all the time. I probably have successful Primerica people all over the country who hate me, because I will tell people, find the successful ones and call them. Say, can I have an hour of your time? I have 30 minutes of your time on the phone. And some poor guy in Philadelphia is going, who is this person from Mississippi calling me? Well, Dan Hall said I should call you. Who's Dan Hall? Some guy down with David Landrum. He told me to call you because you're successful and I like what you're doing. I would just like 30 minutes for you to coach me up a little bit, or I'd like to sit in on some of your training, or whatever it is. Put yourself around successful people. Find the people in your own hierarchy, in your own upline to David. Find the ones that seem to be getting traction and ask sometimes if you might could sit in on some of their presentations or even some of their sales. You don't want a commission, you don't want a piece of the action, you just want to see how they do it. Number last. This sounds funny, but if you want to tame the amygdala, one way you get out of your head is that you encourage others. When you're feeling discouraged, the last thing you want to do is encourage someone else. And it's the most powerful thing. If you know someone's struggling, shoot them a note, send them a text, call them. Say, hey, David, know you're having a tough week. I just want you to know I was thinking about you. Appreciate what you do. If there's anything I can do for you, let me know. The power of encouragement, the power of helping and encouraging others. Well, Dan, I just don't feel like I have a whole lot to say. I had somebody call me the other day, and if I've heard this once, I've heard it a million times. Well, Dan, I just wanted to check on you, but I really don't know what to say. This wheelchair really messes people up. It just freaks them out. And so he called me, and it's been months since I've heard from him. And he said, I just didn't know what to say. And I said, well, let me see if I can help you. How about hello? How about, hey, I was thinking about you. I don't really have anything to say, but I just didn't want to let a day go by without calling to say, hey, and just let you know I was thinking about you. Do you know that for 90% of the people out there, that may be the only call they get this week, encouraging them? And it may be exactly what they need. And here's the trick. It's exactly what you need as well. Let's take a lesson from Damien Jackson. Let's be willing to get out there, believe in what we're doing. We might get rejected a few times. You will get rejected. An entrepreneur accepts that as a part of the struggle, as a part of what equips them. Cultivate the Marine motto, tame the amygdala. All right? All right, David.
Dan,
Back
man,
to you.
that was incredible. Thank you so much. And and we love you and your courage, and you encourage so many. So Dan is he was my pastor. He's my pastor now out at Livingston. And by the way, we're going to do 3 events next year. We're going to do one in February, April, and September. Of course, we'll have the convention, but we're going to do them here in Jackson. And then a lot of people enjoy kind of making a weekend of it. And that way you can come to Livingston, our little fellowship. Dan, will you explain a little bit about how that happened, the church deal?
Yeah, let me see. I hadn't thought about it in a while, so I want to make sure I keep it short. There's a 30-minute version. Let me see if I can do it. Let me do if I can do the 3-minute version.
Good.
So David, back in 2005 or 6, somewhere around there, came to see David. He had me come speak to his base shop. I was actually coaching some of his leaders, and he took me out to this corner property, and he said, I'm going to build a town right here. And I said, you're an idiot. I couldn't
hilarious.
I couldn't any more see it than a man on the moon. And sure enough, there's a town there now. And I'm not even close to an entrepreneur if you put me up next to David. And I've always said that. And so years later, he was giving me, hey, I'm going to move this chapel here, and I'd really like there to be a church there. And I'd like you to pastor it. And I said, no way. I'm not going back into, look, I was coaching lots of pastors, but I had done my duty. And I was just wanting to help churches, not lead one. And so I said no, and he found someone else, and I was relieved. And then that person backed out, and he brought me out to the house and cooked me a big old piece of meat and fed us and said, hey, I really want you to think about this. And I said, no, I'm not going to do it. And then I got to thinking and I said, well, let me tell you what I would do it if I could do it this way. And I told him the only way I could lead was if it looked like this particular church. And he said, well, that's exactly what we want. And I said, well, if we can do that, I'll do it. And so we agreed to begin to move ahead. And then I had my accident.
But Dan, what were the three things?
So our I don't want to say it's our motto. The values that frame us are simple, authentic, organic.
Yeah.
And that's the reason that's a 30-minute. I could spend lots of time on each of those. But bottom line is we have a lot of great churches around here, but church can get awfully complicated and lots of hoops to jump through and lots of meetings to be at. And I've done that. My last church that I pastored was 5,000 on a weekend. I know what it's like to run big organizations. But we want to keep it simple. Secondly, we want to keep it authentic. And that's not always easy because Christians are the best at everything's fine, everything's fine, everything's fine. And maybe it's not fine. Maybe we're struggling. Or sometimes we mess up or the sound system messes up and we're not driven by perfection. And then third, organic, which means whatever happens grows up from within the body and not pushed down from the top. So that's who we are, and started with about 20 people in August of 18, or was it 18? 17, in August of 17. And we were getting ready to go to 2 services when the pandemic hit. And so we're back to rebuilding right now. And it's been a fun little journey. We would love to have you